What's up, everybody? It's me, Joey P, Joe Pizzapia, and welcome to Fantasy Pros, the home of fantasy sports. It is me, it is Kyle Yates, it is Mike Tagliere, and it's you. And we're talking about pro days. That's right, the risers, the fallers. So I hope you got all of your stopwatches out, and I hope you are ready to go because we got a great show for you today. We're going to talk about some of the prospects for the NFL draft that have really kind of done themselves a service with some of these pro days in the last few weeks, and some maybe that have done themselves a bit of a disservice as well. Guys whose stock may be dropping, or maybe some more questions about them and not enough answers. We're going to break that all down for you, including our take on the trade that went down last week. We've been so busy mock drafting and doing all these things that we really haven't sat down and have a really good powwow about that. We've also got a 17-game NFL season upon us, which I love, but Mike Tagliere, I don't know if he's going to make it through. It's going to be really tough, so I got to tell you, boys, I'm excited about this. And Yates, I know you are, again, our Dynasty guy, and make sure that you are checking out the Dynasty Football podcast that Kyle Yates and Ray Garvin host right here. They just finished a two-part series analyzing the 2021 running back class, which you got to check out. In-depth analysis. Look, they know what we're talking about when it comes to Dynasty strategies, so it's great for the new players or the hardcore Dynasty people that have been playing for years, and you can find that wherever you listen to your podcast. So, Yates, I want to start with you because, you know, pro days are always kind of, most people look good in pro days. I made the joke at the top of the show. Everybody looks good in shorts because it's very different when you have, you know, just guys running drills, guys throwing balls, guys running routes, whatnot, as opposed to real in-game action where you have to react to everything going on and actually someone trying to stop you from doing it. So do you think in some ways we overrate pro days a little bit? And do you value game film more, or is it more of an even kind of situation for you?
Well, there's two sides of it, right? Because overvaluing pro days is a tricky and a slippery slope.
It's a slippery slope. It's a little slippery slope.
A slippery slope. You know, because as you're...
I had one of those when I was a kid. They were so fun. I used to always fall and hurt myself and like knock the wind out of myself all the time.
Oh, my word. Okay, so looking at pure pro day numbers, that is where you can get into trouble. Now, analyzing the combine data, that is something that you can at least have as a solid foundation to either validate your opinions than what you saw on tape, or to go back and say, like, okay, did I miss something? Is there something there that I didn't see? So this year, specifically, with no combine, right? Even though last year, 2020, we all know what happened. Even though that we had the combine last year, we had the data on these players to be able to go back and analyze and say, okay, we know what this Henry Ruggs ran this, and it was done with the same technology. It was done with this, this, and this. Whereas with each individual pro day that's happening this year with no combine, everything's kind of different. They're trying to make it as, you know, seamless as possible, as kind of standard as possible, but yet you are going to have some discrepancies. So specifically with these pro day numbers that we're going to be talking about here, they do need to be taken with a grain of salt. Yes, they can help us put together pieces of the puzzle, but yet they do need to be taken with a grain of salt because these are going to be different data points than what we've been dealing with previously.
All right, now, Tags, I don't know about you. I've never been a big guy in terms of combine stuff. Like, I don't want to put too much into the combine. I like seeing the players in live action, how they react to defenses, what they do for adjustments, how they make their reads, and able to look for that first option, the second, the third. I like the intangible stuff there, and I think there's only so much of that you can get when you see guys running 3 cone drills and stuff like that. But I understand the whole point of evaluating the athleticism of these guys. But for you, you know, when you are, say, looking at things from a longer redraft standpoint as opposed to a dynasty where Yates is coming from, do you find that it is something that you put a lot of stock in terms of these pro days?
I don't. And I say that pro days to me have always been something I almost never pay attention to, and I'm fully transparent about that. The combine is something that I do because I believe everyone's on a level playing field. Everyone is measured on the same track. Okay. Everyone is measured with the same time stamps and all that stuff. They have the receivers they're throwing to are guys that they haven't thrown to throughout their entire college career. Then you go to a pro day and the conditions are ideal. You sleep in your own bed. You know, you're going to your own field. You're throwing to wide receivers. So, you know, like watching the pro day for like Zach Wilson, for example, right? The throw that he made, you know, going to his left away from his body, like
Yates was smiling because he knows exactly which one you're talking about.
It was a it was a truly ridiculous throw. However, I do want to stop this and say, if he was at the combine, that throw wouldn't have happened. And the reason that would have happened there because these are guys that he's practiced with. So therefore, they can say, Zach, we have this play timed down where we're going to have you roll out to your right, we're going to have you roll to the left. like turn around, go to the left, and right when this player is on this yard line, you know exactly where to throw the ball because you know that player's speed, you know the field, you know the landmarks that you're looking at to throw. There's so many things that go into that it's like the conditions were ideal and you know those wide receivers. Where it's like you go to the combine, you're throwing to the wide receivers that are at the combine. You've not had time to play with those guys. So all of that's different. And again, the 40 times are inflated. We knew that. You know, everybody talked about it before Pro Days started this year, saying all these numbers are going to be inflated this year. But yet, the numbers start coming out of players running the 4.2s, and it's like we already knew they were going to be inflated. So why are we putting so much stock into them? So you guys are going to notice throughout the show today, Yates is going to talk about the risers and fallers, and we're just going to kind of react to that because Yates stays on top of that from a dynasty aspect, whereas me, I haven't really stayed on top of the Pro Days as much as some.
And this is great because you're going to get the takes from everybody here. You're going to get the redraft, the dynasty outlook. Also, I want to thank the sponsor of today's show, Slippy Slide. If you're looking for some backyard fun, I almost made Mike spit out his drink. I just got him right there. This is why you watch on the YouTube channel here on Fantasy Pros too. But yeah, Slippy Slide, if you're looking for some backyard fun this year and you don't have a pool, Slippy Slide is the perfect thing for you. Yates will come to your house and set it up. It's going to be a beautiful thing. Also, I want to remind everybody to go to fantasypros.com/draftwizard because we have the draft simulator available for you. Look, it's a fun thing. We love using the draft simulator here. We just did it just yesterday for a podcast for our dynasty draft that we did. Like, you do a draft in 15 minutes. You can change it to however the specs are for your league. It's great because you can really start to get, I would say, you know, kind of like the pro day or the camp, the training camp of drafting. That's what this is. So it's never too early to start getting an idea of the board, especially if you play a lot of best ball and things like that. You want to sort of get a sense of where the values are and then do it again after the draft happens and get an idea. And once again, you can go to fantasypros.com/draftwizard to get that all set up for yourself. So a few things here. Let us first begin with the 17-week season because that just came down, that announcement. And my first reaction, guys, is very simple, which is if you think that you saw running backs by committee in the last few years, you're going to see even more of it. And I know it's only one game, but I can't help but also think about the impact it had on the free agency of that impending extra regular season game on teams like Seattle and getting Chris Carson back, on teams like the Packers and bringing back Aaron Jones, the known entity running backs that they feel good about, that they know the system and understand that, because you're going to need a whole lot of running backs probably to get through. That was my initial impact. It also, to a certain extent for me, guys, you move quarterback up even just a hair more because they're so protected and so consistent, and the injury quotient is just slightly less compared to some of the other players. So, Tags, what's your take on this 17-week season that the NFL is putting into place?
Yeah, I wrote down a couple notes just because I felt like, this was a thing where we have to wonder about whether teams are going to start resting players. Like, we see in week 17 all the time, teams rest players. Is that going to extend now? Is there going to be a week in the middle of the season that the teams are kind of like, hey, we're going to give them a little bit of rest. We know they need it. Are we going to see teams utilize the 3-game IR thing like they did in 2020? I think this is a real thing moving forward where we're going to see teams utilize that a lot more just to let players recoup from injuries. As for fantasy leagues, how does it affect it? I think that it does further the skill gap, to be fair, because you're adding one game to the fantasy regular season. And, I can't tell you how many people that I see in my mentions tell me, Tags, I finished with the second most points in my fantasy league, but my record didn't get me in. So some people want to move to an all points league, but it eliminates some of the fun of going head to head with friends. But when you add another game to that, it does add another game where it's like, if you're a consistent team, you're going to make the playoffs more often than not. So I do think that it increases the skill gap. And I also think that there's a better chance for rookies or breakout players to happen because the longer season, it's like you're looking at these guys trying to earn reps, right? Cam Akers is a pretty good example from last year where it's like, he didn't get to start right away. And as the season went on, he started getting more and more opportunities. So you could see more like rookies that are trying to earn their way into playing time, fight their way into the starting lineup, and then become bigger as the season goes on. I don't know if that really affects a whole lot, though, in draft season, because, again, you can't hold players throughout the entire season waiting, unless you're in, like, a dynasty format or a really, really deep rostered redraft format. So the biggest thing, Yates, and I'm curious if you've thought about this, is what it means for NFL records, what it means for milestones, what it means for thresholds. We talk about it all the time. This player has had X 1,000-yard wide receiver. Yes, 1,000-yard seasons for a wide receiver or a running back, this many receptions. And it's like, all of a sudden we're adding another game. But do we think, if you're a head coach, I always try and think from like their shoes and saying, Is one game going to make the difference for them to say, okay, we need to rest a player? I wish they would have given every team 2 bye weeks. That's personally what I think the players deserve, but apparently that's not going to be the case. So at some point, do the coaches say, we're going to give them a middle, especially those with bye weeks later in the season, where it's like, we're going to give them a breather in the middle of the year. Just give them, I don't want to say a game off, but you might want to do that just to keep your players fresh.
Yates, your thoughts on that?
No team is ever going to be 500 ever again. That's crazy.
Well, that's true.
No, but going back to what Tag said about milestones, and absolutely, like our threshold and perception of how good a player is based on the fact that they finished with 1,000 yards or 1,000 yards rushing or whatever, that has to be thrown out. Now we have to find that new threshold and prorate it, and we'll determine what that is. But as we've seen, that's kind of been gradually happening anyway. As the NFL has moved more and more towards pass-happy offenses, we've started to see more and more players reach that threshold earlier on too. So as rookies start to enter the NFL and have an immediate impact. So as my thoughts overall with the 17-game season, I do think that we're going to see more injury risk. I don't know, I can't say definitively whether or not we're going to see more injuries happen, but yet I do think that the risk increases, obviously. So as we move into next season, this is something that we talked about on the podcast here with the 2020 season and the COVID list and IR and all this stuff, was expanding your bench spots if you had the capability. Typically in a redraft league, you're seeing 6 bench spots is kind of standard. I think now, moving forward, I think that needs to be increased to 7 or 8. And then potentially even adding an additional IR spot too, as opposed to what we had previously. If you had 1 IR spot, then add another one. If you had 2, then add another one. Like being able to add at least a little bit more insurance there for people who, as we expand to another game, it is going to increase the injury risk. So at least building in that threshold, that safety net for the teams here to have a little bit more depth.
I certainly agree with the sentiment, too, that some of these younger players obviously get more opportunities, so it's more imperative that even if you don't play Dynasty, that you listen to shows like this so you're aware of these players. And to Yates' point, if you're expanding benches, it's very important to know some of these names that can help you even in the second half. You're drafting and stashing almost, which becomes, I think, more of a thing in the NFL than maybe we're used to. I also saw some sentiments out there, too, some people saying, well, do we expand the regular season or should we expand the playoffs? Any thoughts on that, guys? Where people should go with their leagues?
It's got to be regular season. As I said,
agree.
It'll increase the chances that you don't make the playoffs with a good team. But on top of that, it's like how many teams have to make the playoffs, or you're doing a 2-week playoff. I mean, if you wanted to, you can make it a 2-week championship where it's like week 16 and 17. This is your chance to right the wrong. If you've played in a league that has done week 17 championships forever, keep it that way. Keep it at week 17. Like, seriously, like that's the dumbest thing ever. People should not be playing their fantasy championships in the final week of the regular season. So if you want to do a 2-week championship, you can do that. But my advice to those listening, because again, you want to separate that skill gap as much as possible, add the extra week to the regular season.
Yeah, I just don't get it. How anybody can do all that work and then get to week 17 and let everything be decided where players aren't even playing.
Yeah, it's terrible.
It's maddening how many people are still out there doing it. That's the thing I don't get, that it still goes on after all this time. All right, let's move on real quick to the trades that went down last week. So the San Francisco 49ers acquired the number 3 overall draft pick in the 2021 NFL Draft from the Miami Dolphins in exchange for San Francisco's 2021 first rounder, which is the 12th overall pick, and then along with the 49ers 2022 and 23 first round picks and a 2022 compensatory third round draft pick. Quite a haul there. Miami then continued to deal just a short time later, sending that number 12 pick and 123 and their 2022 first-round pick to the Eagles in exchange for the number 6 overall pick in this year's draft and 156. So if you're still with me, and I hope you are, after all of that, I just wanted to make sure that I got it all right, and I did. Now I can rest easy for the rest of the show. So, Yates, let's break this down here. I know we had a very heated exchange here behind the curtain for everybody between Tags and Yates about what this meant and who the quarterback was going to be. So let's take the impact one at a time. Let's start with San Francisco. Yates, what's the impact here for the 49ers? Who does it feel like they're moving up in order to take?
One, this is for a quarterback. If there are people who are out there saying, and there are people who are saying this might be for a wide, no, just stop. This is for a quarterback, okay? So now that we got that out of the way, now you look at the overall fits. And of course the projected draft board, where Trevor Lawrence going number 1 overall. Like, Okay, we're done. Number 2, it is looking like that is Zach Wilson. San Francisco apparently didn't even make an offer to the New York Jets, which is really interesting when you factor in that Robert Saleh is now the head coach there, and he was in San Francisco last season. So there's a connection there that they could have easily worked something out if New York was intent on moving out. All signs point to that being Zach Wilson, the quarterback out of BYU. So now you're left with 3 quarterbacks that are available. You have Justin Fields out of Ohio State, Trey Lance out of North Dakota State, and then you have Mac Jones, the quarterback out of Alabama. When you look at what Kyle Shanahan has done so far with this scheme, how just tremendous it is, and what he has been able to do with some running backs that, yes, they're talented, they're effective runners, but they're not top tier players, right? As you look at Tevin Coleman, Raheem Mostert, like these guys, Jeff Wilson, these are not top tier names, but yet he continues to produce because the system is so effective. George Kittle, he's constantly scheming him open. He's been able to do that with a Jimmy Garoppolo who has been in and out of the lineup. I don't have the number off the top of my head of how many games he's missed over the past couple of seasons, but it's a lot. Then when you have Garoppolo out of the lineup, you have CJ Beathard, Nick Mullins stepping in. Yes, they're keeping the offense afloat, but it's not still to the point where it's going to threaten NFL defenses. When you look at this move, and you look at what San Francisco gave up to go move up to number 3 overall, this screams Trey Lance or Justin Fields to me. Because looking at this system where it's an outside zone scheme, where they're running, which outside zone means that you're moving either left or right with the offensive line, and they're zone blocking. They're blocking a specific zone rather than a specific player. And what it's up to the running back to do then is to move laterally and then find the open hole, plant his foot in the ground, and get upfield. At that point, what you're able to do with a player who has the mobility, like a Trey Lance or Justin Fields, is when they're going off a play action, they're able to move back around and play action boot, get around, and then that opens up the entire side of the field. When you have the entire defense moving over to one side of the field with the play, quarterback comes back around the other way. Now you have so many different options off of it. And Jimmy Garoppolo has thrived off of that. But now when you add in a player with Justin Fields, who just ran a 4.44 40-yard dash, Trey Lance, I don't think, would be very far behind him. With that mobility, it takes the offense and how good it already is and just opens up the entire playbook. So I think this screams Justin Fields or Trey Lance. Yes, Kyle Shanahan has made it work with Matt Ryan, Matt Schaub, Jimmy Garoppolo in years past, but to move up from 12 to 3, to send away 2 future first-round picks, does not scream Mac Jones to me whatsoever. Yes, Kyle Shanahan can make it work with Mac Jones. It's freaking Kyle Shanahan. But yet when you are making this significant of an investment, that to me screams a top-tier talent, and that has the upside of a Trey Lance or Justin Fields.
To answer your earlier question, Jimmy Garoppolo's missed 23 games in the last 3 years. So that's the total there of games there. I did a little homework while you were giving us your good analysis. Tags, do you agree with the sentiments that it's going to be Fields or Lance that they move up, or could it be surprising and Mac Jones? I mean, I'm kind of on Yates' side about Fields. I like what I've seen out of him. I also think he's a winner, that intangible quality. I think he's a little safer and a little bit more win now, where I think that's where the 49ers kind of are. I mean, they were in the Super Bowl less than a year or so ago, and I don't think they're looking for a project. I think Lance might be a little bit more of that. It feels like Fields or Mac Jones are the more polished assets. What do you think?
There's layers to this, a whole lot of them, and going back to the whole Jets thing, not talking to the number 2 pick, like, so obviously they were okay with a quarterback, one of the top 3 quarterbacks, but reportedly they had conversations with both 4 and 5 as well, so they were looking in that range. They just wanted to get in that range, so it tells me they're okay with multiple quarterbacks. But when you trade your future, and that's what they did, they traded their future to say, we are going up to get this quarterback. I don't think you could do it for a quarterback that has question marks like Trey Lance. Now, I'm not saying Trey Lance doesn't have the second highest ceiling in this class, because I think he does. I think Yates is correct in the assessment that Trey Lance can be a showstopper, a guy that legitimately you have so much trouble with, because in 2019, if you guys just watch 2019 tape and then he came out and did it again in 2020, he would be the number 2 overall pick, and there's no questions asked. But the one game he did play in 2020 did not look as great. It didn't look good at all against the bad defense, and it was supposed to be a showcase for his talents. But again, it's one game. He could have had an off game. He threw his first interception of his college career in that game. So Trey Lance, massive ceiling. But trading away your future for a player like that, it's very risky, okay? When you move on to Justin Fields, are there deficiencies to his game? Yes, there is. And then you talk about Mac, but I do believe that he's the safer pick. I think Justin Fields is the safer pick at number 3, but Mac Jones, he is very much like what Kyle Shanahan has had. You go back to his days in Washington with Kirk Cousins.
Sure.
And you go to his days in Atlanta with Matt Ryan. And you come back to Jimmy Garoppolo, a guy that he traded a lot for, well, not a lot for. He got him at a discount, I would say. But Jimmy Garoppolo and Mac Jones, I mean, why move on from Jimmy Garoppolo if you're going to draft Mac Jones? I mean, I think, honestly, best case scenario is that Mac Jones turns into a Jimmy Garoppolo type quarterback, like an Eli Manning type quarterback.
Right, that's what you've complimented many times, yeah.
Yeah, over the last 2 years, when Jimmy Garoppolo has been on the field, he's completed 68% of his passes, 69%, something like that. He's averaged nearly 8 yards per attempt. He's been a good pocket passer, but I really don't. The part that worries me, though, Yates, is that they were looking at picks 3, 4, and 5, which tells me that they were okay with any of the 3 quarterbacks. But all of a sudden, the one quarterback who's been getting hyped up recently is Mac Jones. All of a sudden, he went from a guy that was going to last till New England or Washington at 15 or 19, and now he's moving up, and it's like, that's the part that concerns me if I'm a 49ers fan. He's considered the most polished passer right now, whereas, Justin Fields is someone that basically his accuracy is spot on, but his ability to read a defense, his processing speed is not very fast. Mac Jones, they have one of the best starting left and right tackles in the league, with McGlinchey and Trent Williams, where it's like, if you have a pocket passer, you need protectors. They paid Trent Williams a lot of money. McGlinchey's fantastic. They brought in Alex Mack, Matt Ryan's former center. There's so much going on here that we can see it go in a multitude of different ways. But right now, my money is on Justin Fields being the pick, just because he does change that offense. I don't know why you'd trade up to draft the same quarterback. And again, I just think there's too many variables with Trey Lance to say for sure I'm willing to mortgage my future to say this is the guy. So it's risky no matter what, because they did mortgage their future. I just can't see it being for Mac Jones. I can't.
All right, so what are your takes on, let's start with you on this one, Tags. Your takes on Miami and Philadelphia.
The Dolphins?
Yeah.
The Dolphins, kudos to them. Like, seriously.
It's amazing, right? This is quite a haul.
They're getting the same player at number 6 that they were going to take at number 3. I think Jamar Chase falls to them. And if Jamar Chase doesn't, if for whatever reason the Bengals decide that they want to reunite Joe Burrow with Jamar Chase, which is a possibility. I know no one wants to admit that, but I think it's a possibility considering that they were interested in Kenny Galladay in free agency. But if he falls to 6th, Jamar Chase is going to go to the Dolphins. And if not, then Devonta Smith or Jalen Waddle. They have their eyes on someone there because, they signed Will Fuller to a 1-year deal. It's a 1-year contract. That's it. Devontae Parker, he's your contested catch receiver. That's what he is. He's not a guy that should be getting 140 targets per season. They're looking for that number 1 receiver, and they're going to get the same player they wanted at number 6 that they would have taken at number 3 at number 6. So kudos to the Dolphins for doing what they did. And again, if for whatever reason, they could even choose to take Penny Sewell. If the Bengals do take Jamar Chase, take Penny Sewell, and you get a stud tackle, which upgrading the offensive line is never a bad thing. So I think the Dolphins, honestly, if you're a fan of the Dolphins, they made out like bandits the last couple of years.
They got lucky last year that Tua came to them where they were. Now all they have to do is make sure Tua gets right. Yates, what's your take on the Dolphins and in the Eagles too, if you don't mind? Your thoughts on this repositioning of the first round?
Yeah, of course. So the Dolphins, of course, move out from number 3 to number 12 overall, which is a significant drop, which then you're looking at, okay, does Jalen Waddle, does Devontae Smith even make it to that point? So what they do is they send away one of those first-round picks that they got and immediately move back up to number 6 overall.
Hey, Yates. Real quick, do you think they had that trade discussed beforehand?
I do.
Yeah, I think they had that.
Yes, that happened within 20 minutes. So, like, while Twitter was melting over the trade, then this comes in, and I'm just like, what is happening right now? It was fantastic. I loved it. So they move back up to number 6 overall. What this does is it positions them to get any skill player that they want. Because if you're looking at Atlanta there at number 4, I fully expect Atlanta to get the hell out of number 4 overall. They're going to move down. They don't need to draft a quarterback at this point. They're going to get out. They're going to let someone else come up for a quarterback. I think that we could very well see quarterback to start the 2021 NFL draft. With that in mind, then number 5 overall, it's either Penny Sewell or Jamar Chase. Then they're sitting there at number 6. They have their pick of the litter. What this also does, and I can't remember where I saw this, if it was on Twitter, I would definitely mention who brought this point up, but because it's a great point. But what
It was definitely me then.
What they said was what Miami does here with moving up to number 6 overall is it puts them above who's picking number 7 and who's picking number 8. Detroit and Carolina. What this does is it positions them to still have a valuable draft pick. If Deshaun Watson, this whole situation gets cleared up, they have a higher pick than Carolina to be able to mortgage and send away. And of course, they have a treasure chest of future draft picks as well that they can say,
they do.
If Deshaun Watson does become available, if this whole situation gets cleared up and he's good to go, no off the field issues whatsoever, anything like that, it not only sets them up to draft the skill position player that they want, but it does position them to be able to make a run at Deshaun Watson and have a better offer than a Carolina or whatever. So it's a win-win for Miami. It's really, really smart if that is the approach that they took. Regardless, it's a smart move because it does put them in position. Now, with Philadelphia, you mentioned Philadelphia, Joe. What this does moves them down from number 6 overall to number 12. It takes them out of the quarterback conversation, and it effectively takes them out of really all of the skill position players. You might have a Devontae Smith sitting there. You might have a Jalen Waddle, but I really doubt it. I think all these guys are going to go. Kyle Pitts is going to be gone. Jamar Chase is going to be gone. So now they have a ton of draft picks over the next 2 years, potentially even 3 first-round picks in 2022. So what Philadelphia can do now is they can say, we'll rebuild. We'll build around Jalen Hurts. He's going to be our quarterback for 2021. We'll see what happens, and we'll see what it looks like. But moving forward, I think that Jalen Hurts is now the starter for 2021, and then it becomes a question of what they do in 2022. So smart move by them. Get down, add an impact player there on the defense, maybe at number 12 overall, and then you've got some solid draft capital to potentially rebuild this roster in a big way in 2022.
All right, so the NFL draft is one of the great dramas in sports, and it's always very exciting. I'm always a big fan, and I'm hoping that we have some more drama too, because this was certainly a good start. And as Yates said, perhaps we're even going to get a little more. Perhaps we're in a situation where we could potentially get an even bigger trade down the line there, as he's alluding to, with the Miami Dolphins still having some leverage there to go. So let's talk about some pro days, and let's switch gears, if we may, for a moment, because now we're talking about the guys that are actually going to be taking in the NFL draft. And there's some guys, obviously, that Yates has had his eye on that seem to be heading in the right direction. And I know the first player on your list is a running back from Louisiana, and it's Elijah Mitchell. And watching some of the film on him this morning and some of the highlights, it's funny. I'm going to throw an old name at that I know you won't know, probably Yates, but maybe you will. I don't know. Tags will know because he's old too. But he reminded me a little of Robert Smith, just a clean runner back in the day of the Vikings. He was just such a clean, effortless runner at times, had really good speed. He's also a guy that if he hit the hole and the hole wasn't there necessarily, he was able to bounce out. And I saw a lot of that in some of this tape on Elijah Mitchell. So what have you seen so far in Pro Day when you've been looking at Mitchell that really thinks for you that you might be moving him up some draft boards, or that the NFL might as well?
Yeah, so with the conversation here with all the Pro Days, I'm not just going to talk about the top tier names. One, because with a bunch of these guys, we still don't, like Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, they're not running, right? Najee Harris isn't doing the testing and stuff like that. So we don't have that data. Now, as we're recording, we've got Jamar Chase, running a 4.38, and Kyle Pitts' Pro Day is here later on today, which I'm just going to be freaking out over because he's just going to test off the charts. So I'm not just going to be talking about the top tier names here. I wanted to go a little bit in depth and just point some guys out that have seen their stock rise and fall. You mentioned Elijah Mitchell, Joe, running back out of Louisiana. Now, Mitchell is a really interesting case because when I sat down to watch his tape, I really liked what I saw. Sitting there at 217 pounds was what he was listed and what he played at. Mm-hmm. And you scout him and you say, yeah, I think he's got the traits to be a really solid NFL rotational. You mentioned more and more teams moving towards a committee approach. I think that's the role that Elijah Mitchell can fill. Now, I don't think that he was going to step in and be a guaranteed starter. Ray Garvin, my co-host on the Dynasty podcast, has been hyping up Mitchell, saying that he was the James Robinson of this class. He said that a couple of months ago. Well, then Mitchell shows up to his pro day here, and remember, I said 217 pounds, weighs in at 201 pounds, and runs a 4.38 40-yard dash, which I did not see on tape. So he comes to his pro day, he cuts down significant weight, and then just blows everyone away. So now, with his skill set, he's an excellent pass catcher out of the backfield. So now he can fill this role for an NFL team where he and his agent may have sat down and said, listen, NFL teams are not very high on you as far as this role that you can fill as a true workhorse back. They don't see that. Let's cut down some weight. Let's take advantage of your athletic traits that you have. Now let's refine your game and let's make you a pass-catching running back. Let's make you a change-of-pace back that can bring value to an NFL offense. That's the role that Elijah Mitchell can fill now because he tested extremely well, a 37.5 vertical jump as well. So he's got the traits, he's got the athletic profile. Now it's just going to be a question of what role does he fill in the NFL.
Tags, do you see Mitchell in that same way as a potential sort of pass-catching change of pace back, or do you think there's even potential for more?
When I was watching him, I didn't feel that way. I felt like he was a depth chart running back where he was a guy that you could, basically if there's an injury ahead of him, he could do all 3 down work. He's a willing pass blocker. He's a decent receiver. He has some wiggle and shake to his game, but I feel like he's more of a follow the design of the play type running back. But I legit, Yates, I wrote down, I said he lacks any sort of speed or burst. So it's like I saw the same things you did on tape, and then all of a sudden it's like he drops 16 pounds. That's what I take from this. Like, you can't fake, like, a weight is a weight. Right. You know what I mean? He changed basically the running back that he wants to be viewed as. I think he understood he wasn't going to land a workhorse job anywhere. So kudos to him for sticking to that. When running backs lose weight, it's typically a good thing. When they add weight that's when things tend to go the wrong direction because they're not used to playing in that weight. Things can change. So I would say this helps his stock. I just don't know how NFL teams are going to feel about it because they may have been scouting him for one thing and then he changes it up and it's like, no, you're doing this thing. And it's like they really just don't know that player because he was never used completely in that fashion. But I would say overall this probably helped him because, again, I tend to like it when running backs lose a little bit of weight. He may have gone too far. Like that 200-pound, like that threshold right there, that's typically when running backs start to lose work because they're not considered a guy that can carry the load for an offense.
All right, let's talk about another running back here, Kenneth Gainwell out of Memphis, and certainly a player you've seen him, in the Wildcat. You see him catching balls as a wide receiver. You see him playing running back, somebody that certainly could fit in terms of a very creative offense in the NFL. So what is it about Gainwell that you've seen and that it looks like some of the scouts are seeing as well in these pro days from Gainwell that you believe that he could actually increase his stock here in the NFL draft?
Gainwell is my guy that I'm going to stand on the table for in this running back class in the 2021 NFL draft. So Gainwell, what we needed to see from him, he opted out of 2020. So we have a very, very small sample size of him being a valuable asset for Memphis in 2019. Now, for all the talk that we had about Antonio Gibson coming out with only 77 career touches, that was because of Kenneth Gainwell. So it had been a while since we had seen Gainwell on the football field. We needed him to come out to his pro day and just show out. Checks in over 200 pounds at 201 at 5'11", runs a 4.42 40-yard dash, which is just flying. To pair with his hands that he has, which is, in my opinion, unquestionably the best in this entire draft class as far as what he can do as a receiver. So I'm mentioning him here in this section as a riser because we hadn't seen him in a while. We didn't know what his weight was going to be. We didn't know if he was going to check in over that 200-pound threshold that Tags was talking about. And he shows up and just puts together a solid performance at his pro day. So to pair with his his receiving ability and then the speed that he just showed in the 4.42 40-yard dash, I'm all in.
All right, are you all in, Tags, on Kenneth Gainwell?
I like Gainwell. I think that you need an offensive coordinator that's willing to use him in a lot of different ways, and that's why in my mock that I released yesterday, I put him to the Arizona Cardinals in the second round. I felt like I don't see this team moving forward with just Chase Edmonds, but you look at what Gainwell does well. Fantastic receiver. He's probably one of the better receivers that we've seen coming out of the running back class in a way that, teams can use Christian McCaffrey in a way. McCaffrey's, he stands in his class alone, but Gainwell is he's a fantastic receiver. So I would love to see teams utilize him in the slot, get him used on screens, figure out ways to get the ball in his hands, and not necessarily because he's a 3-down back that you need to pound the ball with over and over. I was a little disappointed just looking at his 3-cone number here. That was a lot higher than I would have thought for someone like him because he's quick, he's slippery. But I know some players just don't test that well in those things. Like DK Metcalf, people talked about his and they were worried about it. But Gainwell, from what I saw on film, I like Gainwell. I don't think his numbers did anything to move him down on my board or anything like that. But I was a little surprised, I think, by the 3-cone drill.
All right, Yates, you got 3 wide receivers on this list as well for the risers so far on pro days. So where do you want to start with which one of these guys?
I do want to talk about Elijah Moore to start off here because this is a player that I am torn on, and I know Tags is kind of in that same camp. So Elijah Moore checks in, a wide receiver out of Ole Miss, checks in at 5'9", 178 pounds, which is pretty light for a wide receiver, but yet we've seen it work. He's a slot receiver through and through. freaking runs a 4.35 40-yard dash, 36-inch vertical jump, 120-inch broad jump, and then runs a 6.66 3-cone. So, like, these are off the charts athletic testing numbers for a player who I did not see this come through on tape. Now, he is a slot receiver, so he's not necessarily breaking through and getting to the open field a ton. I think that his hands, he received one of the highest like receiving grades out of the wide receivers in this class for me because he's got sticky hands, just does not drop anything. So I think that he's got the traits there to be a valuable slot receiver in the NFL, but I did not see these numbers as far as a 4.35 and a 6.66 3-cone drill translating to his tape. I didn't see it to that level. And I went back, after the pro day, I saw the numbers come through. I was like, I did not see that. I'm going to go back and watch his tape. I did watch some all-22. I still didn't see it. I still didn't see that level of athleticism. So I think if he can get with a innovative offensive coordinator that can get him schemed open, and can get him schemed open and get him the ball in the middle of the field or on screens or on, jet passes behind the line of scrimmage, I think that he can be very, very effective. But yet this is just not something that I saw to that level. But the NFL seems to be very, very high on him. I did want to talk about him here, though, because I know Tags is a little bit torn on him as well. So I wanted to hear Tags' thoughts, too.
Yeah, well, I also want to piggyback on that, Tags. Is that the trap? Is Moore the perfect kind of trap player? Because, as Yates was saying, he didn't see all of this in the game film. He didn't see all of this coming. And then you see all these great numbers. And some people, it's like, the kids who test really well, but not necessarily very smart, or vice versa. The kids who are really great at school, but then they get into those standardized tests, so they aren't very good. And I wonder kind of, is Moore a trap here with this numbers, or is there something to really glean from that?
Yeah, it feels like somewhat of a trap. Like you could fall in love with these numbers, and if he moves up into the first round, that's just too far. I was with Yates in this one as well. I didn't think, and my notes was, I said that I didn't think he had as much burst as you'd expect from a player that was his size. He weighed in at 178 pounds. It was lower than his listed weight. He was listed at 185, so maybe he lost a little bit of weight to make sure he ran that 40 extremely well, did it better in the 3-cone. But the thing I like about Elijah Moore, he looks like a natural football player, and I never want to bet against those guys. But when I watch him, I'm trying to figure out his role in the NFL because I think he rounds out his routes far too much. I don't think he's slippery enough or has enough burst from what I saw in film to be a consistent slot receiver. I actually wrote at the bottom of my notes, I said, I wonder if teams would actually view him as a third down back that they could use in the receiving game. I started trying to figure out ways because I don't have a defined role for him right now. So that's why with me, it's just trying to figure that out with him. But again, he is a natural football player, but there are limitations to his game where I don't think he's a plug and play slot receiver that you could just plug in any offense and make it work. I want to see someone get creative with him. The numbers, obviously, you should be able to find ways to utilize him in gadget plays, use him on screens because he does have very, very, very good hands. But this could be a situation where it's like you're seeing his stock rise a little bit too much in the draft community right now.
All right, now Dwayne Eskridge was a player who was taken yesterday by, I believe, Tags, and it caused a little bit of a kerfuffle in the draft room there because I know Yates was very high on him. So not too happy there, not too exciting for Mr. Yates because I think he had his eye on him. So what is it about Dwayne Eskridge so far for you, Yates, that you have him as a riser after Pro Day?
Yeah, so with Eskridge, he's a top 5 receiver in this class for me. I have very, very high on Eskridge and what he can do. Obviously, a wide receiver out of Western Michigan. He shows up to his Pro Day at 5'9", 190, which is solid size to be able to at least win on the outside with his release package that he has, but then runs a 4.38 40-yard dash, which we expected. We knew that he was going to run really fast, and this is something that put him on the national radar. I've been one of the higher guys on Eskridge, and there are a lot of people who are kind of not seeing it with him. I really don't understand how you don't see it with Eskridge, so I'm a big, big fan. He validated what I saw on tape here by running with that incredible speed, and I think that he's going to go a lot higher in the NFL draft than many people are anticipating.
Now, Tags, you're seeing it because you drafted him yesterday in the Dynasty mock. So what is it you're seeing in Eskridge?
I feel like there's a great spot for him in the NFL. When you start looking at the teams and what they need, everybody wants to talk about the X receivers and this receiver and the slot receiver. Well, what about the guy that can stretch the field as the Y, but a guy that can do it and be more than that, right? When I watched Dwayne Eskridge, I knew Yates was high on him. He had watched him before I did, and he was like, tell me what you think about Eskridge because I'm really high on him. And people were giving Yates crap for having him as a top 5 wide receiver in the class. I saw exactly what Yates did. I really did. I watched him and I saw some Deshaun Jackson to his game. I see a physical player that plays a lot bigger than 190 pounds, 5'9", I should say, 5'9" and 190 pounds. His release off the line of scrimmage, you can't press this guy. So therefore, if you give him that cushion, he's going to eat it up and he's going to go past you. And he's willing to fight for the ball, go up for it and fight with it. His hands are not ideal just yet, which is like part of the concern. When I started going through it, I think that can be overrated at times. You don't want a Marquez Valdez-Scantling type player that is basically just going to hurt you. But I mocked him actually in the second round to the Green Bay Packers because I think that he is a phenomenal player to work opposite Davante Adams. I think you have to find someone to do that because what happens is he forces you to tilt the defense, because if you want to put him in man coverage, you can't press him, and if you give him a cushion, he's going to eat it up. So it's like, what are you going to do? And it's like, we know we have to double Davante Adams, so all of a sudden it's like you're opening up so many things in an offense. I think he's fantastic, and I don't think these numbers hurt at all. The 4.3840 is probably about what I expected for him, to be honest. Like, in terms of what we saw on film, he's not a polished wide receiver just yet, but the tools are certainly there. So none of it hurt.
All right, so we've got one more riser here. Yates, who is the last riser? I know it's a wide receiver. Who you got?
Yeah, Tamorrion Terry, wide receiver out of Florida State. Now, Terry, background in the context here is that he left Florida State halfway through this past season. He didn't necessarily opt out. He didn't declare early. He just left Florida State and then declared for the 2021 NFL Draft. So there are a ton of questions regarding Tamorrion Terry and what he can bring to an NFL offense. Now he shows up to his pro day here at Florida State, which is really interesting. I didn't think that I actually had questions. I was like, is he even going to be invited to the Florida State pro day? But checks in at 6'2", 207 pounds, has the size to win on the outside, runs a 4.44 40-yard dash, which checks out on tape. This is what you see on tape. He can just absolutely fly all over the football field. 32.5-inch vertical jump, that's not fantastic, but 126-inch broad jump, which is a 81st percentile number here for Tamorrion Terry, and then a 7 flat 3-cone, which is moving for his size. So really, really intrigued here with Terry. I do not know where he is going to go in the NFL draft. I really don't. Based on tape, based on the grade that I gave him, he's a borderline first-round player. Like, he can make an impact for an NFL team. I like him more than Terrace Marshall Jr. out of LSU. But yet, I just don't know, with him leaving early, with the questions surrounding him, I just don't know how an NFL team is going to view him. But I've got my eye on Terry, and I think that he's rising because he needed to show out at his pro day to be able to give something that NFL teams can lean back on, and he did just that.
Tags, did Terry do enough for you to open your eyes?
I don't think he did. And looking at this, is like he came in at 6'2". He was listed at 6'4", 210. So he came in 2 inches shorter, 3 pounds lighter. So seeing him run a 4.4, I actually expected that because Yates mentioned it. His stop speed after the catch, that allows him to create after the catch. But that's the problem, is him getting the ball into his hands. So this all comes back to a film aspect with me. I didn't give Terry that high of a grade as Yates did. I feel like he's just not a natural separator, but once the ball's in his hands, he could do some work. You have to find ways to get the ball in his hands. Obviously, he's got some athleticism, the broad jump, but the vertical is a little bit disappointing for a guy that's bigger like that, because I don't know if he's going to play that Y role in the NFL. That flanker that could stretch the field. I don't know if he's that guy. So it's like, is he stuck in limbo? Because he's never going to be a possession receiver because he can't separate. So Terry is like one of those guys that I don't know if I'd say it hurt him, but I'm definitely disappointed that he came in at 6'2" rather than the 6'4" that he was listed at.
All right, fair enough. Let's go to some of the fallers as well, because obviously there's always the risers, the guys that have good pro days and all of a sudden create a buzz, but not everybody does themselves a service on their pro day. So let's go some of the negative guys here. Yates, where do you want to start with this list? Because I know you got 5 guys on here. Who do you think has done maybe themselves the worst pro day of their potential here entering the NFL draft?
Sure, and to begin this, there really wasn't any player that I went through and said like, oh my word, they bombed compared to what I thought they were going to run. So, these guys, I don't know if they necessarily saw their stock completely plummet because of their pro day performances, but yet it didn't do anything to raise it up. So to start off here, I'll go with Brevin Jordan, the tight end out of Miami. Checks in at 6'2", 247 pounds. He's been comped to Jonnu Smith. That's been a popular comp here throughout the pre-draft process. I necessarily didn't see that level of athleticism, and that kind of checked out here. 4.69 40-yard dash, which is fine. But then a 31-inch vertical jump, which is only a 22nd percentile number there for Brevin Jordan. So the numbers and the athletic testing didn't necessarily back up what I saw, or what people were projecting as far as his athletic profile with Johnny Smith particularly. Now, I still think that Brevin Jordan is tight end 3 in this class. I still think that he can be very, very effective in the NFL, but yet he didn't do enough there to boost that stock to the point where I think he could work his way into the second round. I think he's more of a third round player, can still be very, very effective, but yet just didn't do enough for me.
Tags, do you have any thoughts on Brevin Jordan?
Yeah, I think Yates. You mentioned at the time, just a moment ago, that you didn't think that players were killing their stock. I actually think that the pro days can hurt more than help for me, because again, I think the numbers will be inflated. So when you see numbers like this that are disconcerting for someone like Brevin Jordan, so a team that's drafting him understands they're sacrificing a bigger tight end. You need this guy to be crazy athletic in order to work in the NFL. 6'2", 247, that's a small tight end. Not a very big target to throw to. So when you see 4.69, you're like, in an ideal scenario, you ran a 4.69, at the combine that number would be higher. So then you see the vertical jump and you look at all these things and it's like, he's not a very big target. So he's that move tight end, someone they're going to move around the formation, try and almost like in that, I don't want to say Evan Engram role, but that's basically the kind of role that I thought he might try and get in the NFL. I think this hurt his stock. I don't think that I still have him as the tight end 3, but I don't think that that's saying much in this class. Once you get past the top 2 tight ends, I feel like it's a very weak tight end class, and you have to find there's tight ends that fit certain roles. But after, Kyle Pitts and Freiermuth, I'm not excited about Brevin Jordan. I do think this hurt him quite a bit.
All right, let's move to number 2 on the Fathers list from Pro Day Fallout. Who do you have at number 2, Yates?
Yeah, I'll go with Rhamondre Stevenson, the running back out of Oklahoma. Now, I am on record saying that I am a fan of Rhamondre Stevenson. I think that he can be very, very effective in the NFL. I comped him to Jordan Howard. That's kind of a really, really identical size, someone who wins in a very, very similar way. And we've seen that Jordan Howard, when he is given the opportunity, he can be very, very effective. Rhamondre Stevenson has only 165 carries underneath his belt in college, so he still has plenty of room to grow and develop. Why I'm including him here is because there's a discrepancy with his tape. Now, he was listed at playing at 6 foot, 247 pounds. So when I'm watching him and I'm watching his tape, I have that in my mind. And when you are scouting, you're scouting burst, right, and acceleration. That it has some weight, right? It carries the weight into the conversation, because a player who is at 247 pounds is not going to naturally move as well as a player who is 200 pounds, right? The burst is going to be drastically different, but yet it needs to be graded on that scale. So when I'm watching Stevenson, I'm scouting with the 247-pound lens. Well, then he checks into his pro day here at 6 foot, 230 pounds. So now I'm curious, okay, were you actually playing at 247 pounds and you cut weight for your pro day, or were you playing at 230 pounds the entire time and the burst isn't what I thought it was going to be? But regardless, I do think that he has adequate and solid enough athleticism to be a factor in the NFL if he gets the opportunity. But running a 4.63 at 31.5 inch vertical jump, 112 broad jump, 7.02 3 cone, those aren't numbers that are going to necessarily wow people. But when you factor in at 4.63 at 230 pounds, it's not terrible. But it's just not going to be enough to see his stock raise. I think he's a 3rd round, 4th round player, a early day 3 player that can absolutely be a factor if he gets the opportunity, but that's not just a question.
Tags, do you think Stevenson can have any sort of fantasy impact, or is he more of a depth guy?
I think he's more of a depth guy. I think he's someone that you're going to see. I think he's going to fall into day 3, maybe even late in day 3, and then you're going to almost like a Bo Scarborough type running back, where it's just he kind of falls in the draft, and you're not going to see him unless there's a couple injuries in front of him. I wasn't a huge fan of his game. I feel like the NFL, he may have been valuable going back 10 years, but I think the NFL today wants a more versatile back, so you're less predictable. I'm not a huge fan of him. I know Yates does like him a bit, and Yates, in order to make you happier, I don't want you to get mad at me. Kyle Pitts just measured in his wingspan 83 3/8 inches. That is the longer wingspan than any wide receiver or tight end in the NFL, breaking in the last 20 years, breaking DK Metcalf's record.
Wow. Word.
Well, I feel really good that I have him in our fictitious dynasty mock that I took yesterday. I feel really good about reaching there, and I'll tell you what, looking back on it now, too, after this pro day that he's having today, I'm sure that stock in Dynasty is going to uptick, what, Yates? You think a whole round now?
Oh, if not 2, yeah.
if not 2, right? So, and I actually thought, look, I had my design to take him in that draft, and I waited, and I was like, okay, I can't wait anymore. I think Jonnu Smith was still on that board, just to give people kind of an idea of where things were at. Logan Thomas was still on the board too, and I was like, look, I'm going to try to take the kid and see what he is. And I ended up getting Logan Thomas later on just to back it up, just in case, it takes him a little longer to figure things out, which I don't think so. I mean, I think we're going to be looking at the guy who breaks the mold there at rookie tight end. It's a very exciting time. But we could talk more about that the next show after all that pro day is done. So we'll try to focus on these last few fallers. So who is number 3 on your list, Yates, that's having a down pro day season?
Yeah, I'll go with Jaret Atwell. Tutu Atwell is how he's more commonly known. Checks in at a wide receiver out of Louisville. I keep forgetting to mention the position and school name. So wide receiver out of Louisville. Checks in at 5'8", which is fine for how, that's what I expected. Runs a 4.32 40-yard dash, which, people listening are like, Kyle, how can you say that this guy is a faller based on him running a 4.32? Checked in at 155 pounds. Based on, people in the draft community still keep talking about Tutu Atwell as a first-round, second-round player. I'm like, what are you watching? I do not see this anywhere on his tape.
There's the same people that worried about Smith at like 170.
I don't know what is going on here with Atwell and the hype, but I just did not see it. He's great running in a straight line. I thought he was going to kill the 40-yard dash, but getting him to that point where he can actually get into the open field and run in a straight line is a whole different conversation. So I just think that Atwell checking in at 155 pounds, there's no player comp. There's absolutely no player comp that you can look at and lean back on and say, like, this is how he's going to succeed in the NFL. If a team spends a first-round, second-round, third-round pick on Tutu Atwell, they're wasting a draft pick.
You're looking at a kick returner here, potentially, Tags? I'm trying to think of some role for him that somebody could see.
This dude, like, the first thing I wrote down about him is that he's extremely small, will actually go backwards when he's hit. And that was when he was listed at 165, which was small enough, and now he weighs in at 155. It's like, I don't get it. I really don't.
Well, it seems like a trend, Tags, doesn't it? Like, where everybody's losing weight so they can get their 40 time down and then bulk up again once they get drafted. But
when you're that light, you can afford to do that, and that's the reason Devontae Smith didn't weigh in, because he knows there's nothing to be gained from that.
Right.
So Atwell, this is definitely going to hurt him, and I want to know what Atwell does that Dwayne Eskridge can't do. Like
Atwell does that Jalen Darden can't do.
Jalen Dart, I have them both in the same tier, to be fair. I have Eskridge a lot higher than those guys, but I never understood the first-round love with Atwell. I don't get it either for a receiver of that size. It's like, if you were to put Marquise Brown back in the draft right now, Marquise Brown is better in every single way. I don't even know if Marquise Brown would go in the first round, considering what we've seen in the NFL in terms of like a smaller wide receiver. I don't know. And again, Marquise Brown is a much better football player than Tutu Atwell.
All right. So we have a pair of running backs to close things out here on the fallers, and then we're going to get to some of the surprise pro days too. Guys have really kind of maybe come out of nowhere, and Yates is going to give us some of those names. But give us these last 2 guys because they're both the same position. One's a running back from Buffalo, and the other running back from Louisville.
Yeah, I'll go with Jaret Patterson here first. And people, who even pay attention to college football in the slightest form will know the name Jaret Patterson because of his 8 touchdown performance that he had this past season. Just crazy productive, but he checks in at 5'7", 195 pounds, and then proceeds to run a 4.54 40-yard dash. But here's the kicker, too, a 30-inch vertical jump, which is just a 7th percentile number. So Patterson, productive in college, productive at Buffalo, just does not have the size to succeed in the NFL, is going to be relegated to that like change of pace receiving role, doesn't have the speed to succeed in that role, doesn't have the athletic traits to succeed in that role. So I just think that he's one of these guys who, people that pay attention to college football, they're going to know the name, they're going to think that he's going to go a lot higher in the NFL draft, and they're going to wonder on, rounds 5 and 6 why he hasn't gone off the board yet. So, man, I just think that Jaret Patterson, weighing in at 195 pounds, he needed to run in the 4.4s, didn't happen here.
All right, and last one is Hawkins from Louisville. So what are your thoughts on Javian Hawkins?
Yeah, Javian Hawkins, Ray and I talked about him on a recent podcast here where he was a tough evaluation for Ray. He was a tough evaluation for me as well. Checking in at 5'8", 183 pounds. He was listed at 195 pounds. So when you're scouting him, you're saying, this guy is pretty slight. Like, they were constantly running him on the outside. They rarely ran him in between the tackles. I think he only had like 1 target on the games that I watched. Just not a natural receiver either. So he's a talented player. He's a big, explosive play waiting to happen, but yet the traits and the skill set just aren't going to match the role that he's going to be asked to fill in the NFL. So I I wouldn't be surprised if, same thing with Jaret Patterson, if we get to rounds 5, 6, maybe even 7, that Javian Hawkins hasn't gone off the board yet.
With Patterson and Hawkins tags, any feedback on these two running backs here? Do you see them being impact NFL players at all?
Well, you know what? We talked about Elijah Moore and not seeing, on film what we did in terms of his times and stuff like that. I think it's the opposite for me with Jaret Patterson. I expected him to be a little bit better. I saw a burst. I feel like he's a Darren Sproles type player where his legs are always moving. He's very springy in the way that he plays. And I would love, I think an NFL team like, someone like the Saints, or even if you wanted to find a team that's going to give him 8 to 10 touches per game, I think he would be fantastic in that role. I don't think he was ever going to be a guy that's going to have a 3-down workhorse role in the NFL, but I do think he can play a role. These numbers are disappointing, though, for someone that you want to play that role at a 4.5 40. The vertical jump, I don't know when I'm ever going to need a running back to jump. Obviously, it highlights some athleticism, but for me, watching him on film, I think he was better on film than these numbers suggest. But again, these numbers are definitely not going to help him.
All right, let's move on to some of the surprises here. And if you'd like, Yates, you can kind of go through these guys, and then we can pick them apart. Let's go through the list of the guys that you have, and then maybe if you want to highlight a few of them for certain reasons, and we'll get Tag's take on them also. So who so far has really surprised you in terms of their pro day and what they've done for their stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I'm just going to rip through these. So Dyami Brown, wide receiver out of North Carolina, checks in at 6'1", 189 pounds. Runs a 4.46 40-yard dash and a 38-inch vertical jump, which just shows his lower body athleticism. So this was someone who I comped to Gabriel Davis. Watching his tape, I thought that he was going to fill a very similar role where not going to be utilized a ton underneath, but can be that guy who can stretch the field and win deep downfield. Now, some people have him as a top 3 wide receiver in this class. I'm nowhere near that range with Dyami Brown, but a 4.46, I did not expect him to run that fast. Now, I think that he wins more with momentum, so it kind of makes sense, but yet surprising performance there in my mind. I'm going to go back to North Carolina, though, with my second guy, wide receiver Daz Newsome, 5'10", 190 pounds. Just finished watching his tape the other day, right as the pro day was going on, and he runs a 4.59 40-yard dash. Based on his tape, I thought he was going to run in the 4.4s. So this is a really, really surprising time, especially when you combine that with a 7.38 3-cone. Not great. So I think he's going to experience a tumble here in draft circles, but I think that if he lands in the right offense, he can be very, very effective. I really liked his tape. Rondale Moore, wide receiver Purdue, we've talked about him a ton. 5'7", 180 pounds. Not necessarily, again, I talked about Tutu Atwell. What's the comp? Like, who are you going to lean back on and say this is his path to success? 5'7", 180 pounds, it's not great, but you're going to lean on the athleticism testing numbers. 4.29 40-yard dash, 42.5-inch vertical jump, and a 6.68 3-cone. This guy is just off the charts athletic. So really, really excited to see Rondale Moore and what kind of role he can fill in the NFL. It's a little bit of a mystery to me. I think he's a slot receiver, but yet it is a little bit of a projection because you just don't have that track record to lean back on of 5'7", 180-pound guys winning in the NFL at the slot wide receiver position. Simi Fehoko, wide receiver out of Stanford, is not a guy that we talk about a ton, but he's someone who is a late-round sleeper, someone to keep an eye on. 6'3", 222 pounds, so a big boy playing wide receiver there. 4.42 40-yard dash and a 35-inch vertical jump with a 6.86 3-cone. Great testing numbers there. And then I'm just going to fly through these last ones. Jake Funk, a running back out of Maryland, 5'11", 204 pounds, 4.43 40-yard dash, 38-inch vertical jump, and then 22 reps on the bench press. This guy has the athletic profile that you're looking at for a special teams player that could eventually turn into something else. Then I'm going to murder this name, but Josh Imatorbhebhe, wide receiver out of Illinois. I guarantee that's not how you say his last name, but 6'1", 223 pounds, and I'm talking about him here because 46.5-inch vertical jump breaks the NFL Combine record. Like, we talked about pro day numbers and how they're kind of skewed, like the 40-yard dash, yeah, you're hand timing it. It's going to be different than the technology timing it and everything like that. A vertical jump is a vertical jump. Like, 46.5-inch vertical jump is just insane. So the athleticism profile is there if you want to try to turn this guy into something down the road. Super raw, needs a lot of development, but the athleticism is there. 46.5-inch vertical jump breaks an NFL Combine record.
Yates, did you watch his film?
I have not watched it yet.
Oh my God. So this guy, so I didn't even see these testing numbers. I basically looked at him once you put up the sheet on the stuff that you wanted to talk about. And I pulled up my notes on him. Well-built wide receiver, incredible balance to bounce off would-be tacklers. The dude, like legit, when you watch him, it's like he's a pinball just going off of defenders. So I love these testing numbers for him. And he actually put on 8 pounds from his listed weight. So this is fantastic news for him. Fehoko is an interesting one because you talked about Tamorrion Terry and the athleticism for a guy that's, was 6'4", 210, but it was only 6'2", 207. Fehoko, 6'3", 222, and running those numbers. I mean, the guy, basically my notes on him were that he's a developmental wide receiver with a big ceiling because he can play both on the perimeter and in the slot. So when you see those numbers, if you find someone that's willing to use him as like a big slot guy, he's not a great route runner. His hands, there's too many balls that bounce around in his hands when they come, but he's a developmental guy that I do believe can get better. So yeah, those were two guys that I love seeing on your list.
Imatorbhebhe, I just want to say that. Or is it Imatorbhebhe? I don't know. I want him to be a success, so we all have to make sure we figure out how to say it. Anybody else on this list that Yates just threw out there at you tags that you feel excited about?
No, I wanted to talk about those two wide receivers. I think it's very telling that Dyami Brown over Daz Newsome, he's 3 inches. Brown is 3 inches taller and tested better in every category.
There you have it.
So Daz Newsome was very, very disappointing in terms of what his numbers were expected to be.
All right, well, we're getting closer and closer to the NFL draft, and obviously anything else that changes, any more trades, any more deals, any more buzz, we'll be bringing to you here at Fantasy Pros. And I want to remind everybody, in the meantime, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast to the Dynasty Football Pod with Ray Garvin and, of course, our own Kyle Yates here. They're doing fantastic work there, getting you ready. And I'm telling you, the 17 game season that the NFL is putting in there, these names are more important than ever. It's becoming a younger man's game, and these guys are coming in and making big-time impacts. We've seen this in the NFL in the last few years, and just look back at this last year's wide receiver class, and I think that's all you need to know. These kids are ready to go, and they're going to make huge impacts, and the longer a season is, the more they're going to rely on some of these younger guys, these fresher guys, and hopefully they can pick up some of these schemes and these offenses quickly and can make that fantasy impact. And also, while you're making sure that you subscribe to that pod, make sure you also check out the Draft Wizard at fantasypros.com/draftwizard and use that draft simulator to start to get ready and play around with these drafts and the early values, see where some of these guys are out there. We have some early ECR and ADP up there at Fantasy Pros as well. I know Tags and Yates and myself all have our rankings. In fact, I'm going to update mine today after this podcast because a lot of good information there to go around, including the reach of Kyle Pitts. So I already had him pretty high, but my goodness, maybe it's just going to go just a tick higher. We shall see how far I can push that one. In the meantime, you can follow us on Twitter at KyleYNFL, at Mike Tagliere NFL, and at Joe Pisa 17. That'll do it for us. And remember, make sure you go out there and get your Slippy Slide as well. It is endorsed by Kyle Yates for backyard fun. So he's got the stamp of approval on that one because summer is right around the corner. We'll be back soon. That'll do it for us. But the story of the game goes on. For Yates and Tags, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.